Okay, so we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us this lunch hour. Welcome to Sierra Nevada Alliance's December webinar. My name is Jennifer Marshall and I'm the Alliance's Development and Community Engagement Director. I'm happy that all of you could join us today. And I am pleased to introduce Scott Valentine and his presentation on how geology shaped California. Dr. Valentine is the lead faculty member of the Earth and Environmental Science Department at Lake Tahoe Community College, and he teaches a variety of classes ranging from oceanography to geology and meteorology. He spent time working as a professional raft guide and a US Forest Service hydrologist prior to his teaching profession. Scott lives in the Lake Tahoe area and spends his time biking, skiing, and chasing his 2 kids around the mountains. So today, if you have any questions as we run through this presentation, you can add them to the chat. If we have the answer for you, we will add them to the chat. But otherwise, we'll save them to the end of the presentation so Dr. Valentine can answer them directly for you. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Scott to begin his very popular presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Like Jennifer said, I do run the Earth Environmental Science Department here at Lake Tahoe Community College. And I teach a wide variety of classes, and I'm always asked to do some public speaking like this. And one of the more popular topics is, of course, how California came into being. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how geology has really shaped California and in many ways, not just landscape formations, but well beyond that. And the impetus for this talk, or sort of the design for this talk, sort of stems from a class that I had just recently with some of my students, and there was a hand that sort of shot up in the back row, and I kind of wanted to finish what I was saying first. So after a little bit, I said, okay, yeah, you have a question? And the student in the back row said, oh, you know, that's all right. I'll just Google it later. So man, if this is the future, I might be out of a job soon. So I kind of have 2 goals here today. One is to make sure that you won't be able to Google some of the things I present here, and this job security, right? And my other goal is to somehow devise a presentation entirely based upon one of my favorite movie quotes, and it comes from one of the best / worst movies of all time, the 1980 movie Airplane. This is a classic slapstick comedy. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's about an airplane that's about to crash for like the whole movie. But at one point in the movie, Lloyd Bridges, the father of some other actors, Jeff Bridges and Beau Bridges, he comes into the air traffic control room to assess the situation as the airplane's about to crash. And he asks his assistant to catch him up on everything that's happened up to this point and to start from the beginning. His crazy assistant, Johnny, says, well, the first was a big bang, and then the earth cooled, and dinosaurs roamed the land, and then they turned to oil, and Arabs drove Mercedes-Benzes. I mean, this is classic slapstick comedy stuff. But I really like this quote from a geologic standpoint. The story's events are created or presented in chronological order, and given its gross inaccuracies, I sort of like the way you can jump from Big Bang to dinosaurs roaming the land, to oil, to getting rich, and then of course driving a Mercedes-Benz. The human brain is a very powerful tool. It's capable of finding cause and effect relationships in just about everything, real or otherwise. Sort of like this interesting correlation we see here between shark attacks and ice cream sales. But this is what I love so much about the airplane quote. To fully understand the quote, however, you have to have some geologic background in order to make it funny. You need to really believe that there's a connection between dinosaurs and Mercedes-Benzes. So I'm going to make some connections here in this presentation, but first we need to understand the geologic setting to help create California. So I'm going to introduce some geologic events in chronological order, and then I'm going to make some ungoogleable claims to explain why California is the way it is. So are you ready? First, we have to go back to before the dinosaurs roamed the land. I won't bore you by starting with the Big Bang, but we should at least back up to the formation of our last major supercontinent, Pangaea. This is the planet approximately 250 million years ago when all the continents had collided to form this united landmass. California actually starts out underwater. You can see the tiny little red pin there and the sort of outline of the United States, where Lake Tahoe is the little red pin. And with California starting out underwater, where billions upon billions of tiny microorganisms are populating the sea. Diatoms, radiolarians, marine mud and ooze, thousands of feet of marine sediments and deposits are eventually going to compact to form the layers of limestone and marble that we see today on the landscape. But also, we're pretty likely, we're possibly talking about all of the biotic source of our oil and our natural gas reserves. So not really dinosaurs. The West Coast at this point is about as geologically boring as Florida is today. But all that's about to change as the continental landmass begins shifting about. We will soon pressurize all that material and lift it out of the water for California to come into being. In order for that to work, we need to break apart Pangaea. 200 million years ago, the supercontinent Pangaea, pan meaning all things or unified, and Gaia or Gaia means Mother Earth. So this supercontinent on Mother Earth begins to break apart. And in this animation, you can kind of see roughly about how that happens. As we are expanding and forming the Atlantic Ocean, the North American continent pushes west. And as we push west, the subduction boundary off the west coast of California is born. Now, when we talk about subduction, this is a really important process to understand how geology has shaped California. The ocean floor begins to undergo the process of subduction, where because of its density difference, it being heavier is going to be forced below a much lighter and overriding continental plate. As that oceanic plate drives down, it gets melted under tons of heat and pressure, and hot material begins to melt and rise to the crust, and we begin to explode up volcanoes onto the surface. We get to emplace magma chambers and plutonic materials underneath the crust, and we also get to see some interesting things happen right along the coast at the point of subduction. We form an ocean trench and we begin to scrape off a lot of geologic material that gets added onto the continent. So as the western United States is advancing towards the ocean plate, we see a lot of the ocean ooze and mud and goo scraped off of the ocean floor and crushed onto the continent. We see a lot of uplift, we see a lot of new volcanism, and we get the emplacement of magma into the interior. We call these intermediary magma chambers plutons as they form deep down underground. The addition of all that material onto the coast is what we call accretion. The accretion that we're talking about here is where hydrothermal fluids are going to be injected into all the new sediments. We see this animation here where the sediments of the ocean floor being much lighter can't be subducted, they get added on, and the ocean floor being rich in heavy metals and materials and disseminated metals like gold and silver and copper are going to be hyper concentrated into the cracks and the weak zones of the rock. Here in this animation, we're seeing some disseminated gold. Remember, the ocean plate is heavy in metals, and that gold is being concentrated now into the cracks within the rocks via hot water. Hot water is bringing with it a lot of silica-based materials, and quartz will solidify along with the metals in between these pieces of ocean floor material. We call those solidified bodies, quartz veins or hydrothermal veins. So when we talk about accreted terrain materials, we can look at this map of this geologic map of California, and we can see a lot of different colors here. We can see igneous intrusive rocks. These are the plutons that were formed underground as a result of subduction. Those are in the sort of dark reds. We see extrusive rock materials. These are exploded out materials that are cooled on the surface. Our volcanic features are going to be our igneous extrusive rocks. Whereas some of the accreted materials are going to come in the form of metamorphic rocks transformed by heat and pressure, and of course sedimentary rocks created as a result of compaction of sedimentary materials, and those will be turned to stone via a little bit of compaction in some mineral cement. So if we're looking at this map of California, we see the igneous intrusive rocks, the plutons of the Sierra and Lake Tahoe there right in the corner. And we see a lot of other color bands sort of mushed onto California. We see the blues and the greens and the purples. And these are all of our accreted terrain materials that are going to be smashed onto the continent during subduction. Now, when we talk about the ocean plate during subduction, it is going to be completely consumed along the central and southern California coast. And once it's gone, another style of plate interaction takes place, and the San Andreas Fault is born. The compression associated with the subduction is now going to be replaced by some sliding and pulling and tugging. This is what we call transform plate motion. This is where one plate slides past the other. And what we like to say is that there's some sliding, but there's also some tugging and extension associated with some of the activity along this fault. Okay, let's back up. What does all this mean? What does it mean when you say the plate is being consumed via subduction? What does it mean when there's tugging and pulling and extension along with this sliding? Let's watch a short little animation to kind of explain what is going on in our San Andreas Fault. So here we are looking at a little animation on the scale bar on the right-hand side. We see millions of years, and at the bottom we start with 40 million years ago, and we'll work up towards today. And what we're seeing 40 million years ago is the ancient Farallon plate just off of the California coast. And we're going to start the animation, and we're going to see how that subduction is going to take place. You can see that the plate is going to be consumed right there in Southern California first. The San Andreas Fault forms, the arrows change direction, and we begin to pull and tug along California, and we can see it sort of extend as that Pacific plate moves further and further north. Did that happen too fast? Let's watch it again. When we see this sort of smushed version of the continent, we see the smashed California and Nevada, and we see Baja sort of mashed onto the mainland part of Mexico here. Once the Farallon plate is consumed and the San Andreas Fault is formed, we pull, tug, and extend the crust out. Baja peels away from mainland Mexico. California and Nevada really begin to take their shape. So along with this pulling and tugging, we get to see the basin and range topography take shape. The basin and range sort of starts here, right in Lake Tahoe, and it moves east into Nevada and into Utah. It extends all the way up into Washington and all the way down into Mexico. So that basin and range topography that we're familiar with is really the result of the tugging and extension along our faults. This is where some of the blocks are going to be pulled and hinged upwards, whereas other blocks are going to be pulled outwards and hinged down. So it's almost as if we can try and imagine like an accordion where we smash the accordion together, and then we open the accordion up, and what you're looking at is the baffles of the accordion, where you have this sort of up, down, up, down, up, down topography, and that is the basin and range. The basins are our low points, and the ranges are our high points in our mountains. Now, when the faulting, along with all of this faulting, we have a lot of uplift. So a lot of uplift associated with this new mountain building. We have erosion, continued uplift. The erosion really begins to take its toll, and the magma chambers that were placed and cooled deep down in the crust during subduction are going to be fully exposed. Those magma chambers probably cooled up to 5 miles underground. So we have to uplift, erode in order to expose all of that material. Being highly resistant to weathering, the magma chamber, which cooled off to form granite, is now exposed for the very first time. So here we are seeing the plutons and the Sierra Nevada batholith that was created during that subduction process 100 million years ago, and it's being exposed here. This is a great example of it. We see Mount Whitney there in the background and the Alabama Hills in the foreground. Now, all of that faulting also concentrates, before I launch into that, I just want to show you how we're sort of color coordinating our map here again. We do see the igneous plutons and the batholith of the Sierra Nevadas in sort of the red colors, and we can see that being exposed for the first time as a result of faulting along the San Andreas. So with all of that faulting, like I said, we're sort of concentrating our hydrothermal fluids and minerals into very certain spots. This makes it way more profitable for mining rather than trying to mine the surface for disseminated materials like spread out all over the place. We're concentrating those geologic riches for human use. Now you could say that our ability to take what is coming out of the ground and have it provide like utility for humans and human civilization, you could say that all sort of began with Spanish explorers first reporting California's original inhabitants using tar, which was seeping from the ground, to waterproof their boats and their roofing materials and things of that sort. But in reality, people didn't really know what to do with the tar and the oil much beyond that, at least not yet. It took a little bit longer to fully recognize and utilize the minerals that were hydrothermally injected into the crust during accretion. So remember, the heavy metals coming from the ocean floor are injected into the crust during accretion and were depositing along with the quartz veins, things like gold and silver, and we're finding these things in high enough concentrations to make it profitable to mine. The new Almaden mine near San Jose could be called California's first mine. In 1846, it goes into production for something we call cinnabar, which is mercury ore. Mercury has a variety of uses, but it's really instrumental when trying to separate gold from its host rock. And lucky for us, 2 years later, in 1848, James Marshall discovers gold at the river's edge in near Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California, and this led to the gold rush of 1849. It started the largest migration of humans in world history. So what that means is the sleepy little hamlet of Yerba Buena, translated as the good herb, is turned into the great city of San Francisco practically overnight. Leland Stanford finds himself moving to California along with the hordes and the influx of people, and he decides to sell shovels and goods to the miners since it was a lot more profitable than the actual mining of gold. Coloma, the site of gold discovery, is just downstream of where the hydrothermal fluids were injected into the weak zones of the rock during the process of accretion. The weak zone is known by geologists as the Malones Fault, but the miners called it the Mother Lode. So you can see here, sort of zooming in on our geologic map, we can see that Mother Lode black line, the fault zone there, extending from Nevada City, Placerville, down further and further south, and it's sandwiched right in between two contacts of the green and the blue metamorphic rocks that were smashed on, seafloor rocks that were smashed on. This zone is where the gold, our now state mineral, is injected into the host rock, which is of course a seafloor rock we call serpentine. It is our state rock. And the 49ers followed this mother lode or the contact zone further south, hard rock mining as they went. And today, all these little mining towns are linked by a road we call Highway 49. And it more or less follows the mother lode belt. Now, with the discovery of gold in California, California is fast-tracked to become a state. It becomes a state in 1850. Now, California becomes a free state, not a slave state. And this will be important maybe a little later on in our story. But the boundaries are drawn to include all of the Sierra and its associated gold fields. But the politicians didn't know very much about this new land, so they drew a lot of straight lines of latitude and longitude on the map to sort of denote our eastern border and boundaries. Now, the only problem with calculating longitude at this time was that there were errors because you see, our zero longitude was actually set in Washington, D.C. It wasn't until 1884 that world consensus was reached, placing zero longitude in Greenwich, England. So we see here the 42 on our map, the 42 degree line of latitude. North is our northernmost boundary, and we extend this 120 degree longitude line right through South Lake Tahoe here, and then it sort of bends to the east and it connects to the 35 degree line of latitude right there at the Colorado River and our Arizona border. Other things to note about California becoming a state, you can see the Great Seal of California. And the Great Seal of California has got a couple things to note on it. We see the San Francisco Bay, we see the Sierra Nevadas in the background, we see Eureka, meaning I have found it. And we see a gold miner with a pickaxe and a pan and a sluice box. We see a grizzly bear eating some grapes and some grain. And of course, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. She was born as an adult, springing from the head of Zeus, much like California sprung into statehood without actually having to become a territory first. Normally that doesn't happen. So some new rules are needed to govern this seemingly lawless land, and in 1855, rights of prior appropriation were designed to allow for the diversion of water via canals and dams to mine the lands that lacked access to water. This is very, very different than the way things were done in the East, but it made mining and future development in the West possible. Very, very important law. Now, I mentioned that it was important that California became a free state. The infusion of California gold into the Union coffers altered history and enabled them to win the Civil War in 1864. Without subduction along the West Coast, our nation's story would be quite different. The influx of people into California continues. To prevent people from getting cold and hungry as they passed over the Sierra, the government was pressured to fund another route. And so the Transcontinental Railroad is built, thereby linking the Eastern and Western economies. The last railroad tie is laid, and Stanford, Leland Stanford, who funded the construction of the railroad, drives in the Golden Spike in 1869. The spike and the railroad tie are later removed and preserved for prosperity. And shipping food grown in the warm California sun to the East Coast in rapid time helps to make California the #1 agricultural producer in the US. Stanford, with his fame and riches, decides to establish a university to house his Golden Spike. Oh, and to mass produce a crop of smarter people on the West Coast. But it is time to dispute some boundary issues. So remember, due to issues with figuring out longitude, our highly contested state boundary line runs right down through the middle of Lake Tahoe. It was called Lake Bigler at the time. The governor of California, who is incidentally now Leland Stanford, imagine that. And the governor of Nevada, who happened to be Mark Twain's brother, they decided to dedicate funds to properly survey the California-Nevada state line. Unfortunately, they ran out of money. I don't know, maybe Leland Stanford shouldn't have spent so much money on a golden spike. It seems a little bit crazy, but this issue, this boundary dispute issue, won't be fully resolved until 1980. There was even a bill proposed to allow the existing casinos in Lake Tahoe to operate in California if the boundary happened to be moved in our favor. If you ski at Heavenly Ski Resort, you ski along the survey line. It's called the Von Schmidt Run. It's the Von Schmidt line, named after the survey crew that moved through that area. And finally, we established the California-Nevada border right there. But speaking of disputes, miners are a tough bunch, and some rules were needed to keep them from shooting one another. So in 1872, a mining law codified the informal system of how you acquire property, mining claims on public land. This was to promote commerce and settle new territory, but more importantly, it was this 1872 law that stated that any contract which prohibits you from engaging in lawful profession or trade or business of any kind is void. In other words, no one can prohibit you from working in the state of California. If you had an issue with your boss and you wanted to leave to go work for his competitor, he cannot prevent you from gaining lawful employment somewhere else. Even if you signed a contract. Hint, hint. There's a little bit of foreshadowing here with some of the stuff I'm telling you. So it seemed at this point a much easier solution than a bunch of miners having a showdown at noon. Around the same time, this man gets off a boat in San Francisco and asks if there's a wild place that a guy can go escape for a while. He proclaims Yosemite as God's greatest cathedral. I mean, who talks about rocks that way? They're just plutons, right? But in 1892, the Sierra Club is formed and they elect John Muir as their first president. They go on to defeat a proposal that would have reduced the protective status of Yosemite Valley and the protection for our state tree, the giant sequoia. This transcendental and environmental movement and shift in thinking helps to transform and change our perspective with respect to geologic landscapes and our views on preservation. At this point in the story of California, what we need to do is we need to move a little further south. So I'm going to draw your attention down to the Salton Sink. It wasn't the Salton Sea just yet. And during the turn of the century, right around 1900, California uses its rights of prior appropriation to divert the Colorado River to irrigate the fertile lands of Southern California. But in 1905, Colorado River accidentally captures an irrigation canal during a period of high runoff, and the entire river diverts into the Salton Sink, thereby flooding the town of Salton. The American people proclaimed, "No matter the cost, the Colorado River must be tamed." And so here is Leland Stanford's Southern Pacific Railroad dumping gravel and rock into the channel to stop the flooding. It was the constant flooding of our fertile lands which was the impetus for building Hoover Dam. And due to California's water rights of prior appropriation, the sea, Salton Sea, has been there ever since. And we still get a lot of water from the Colorado River. Moving back north, the San Andreas Fault makes itself known. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 registers a 7.9 on the Richter scale. Buildings are leveled, fires rage due to lack of access to water. The last railroad tie that was laid in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad burns down along with the city. Not in history has a modern imperial city been so completely destroyed. San Francisco is gone, writes Jack London. Funding, after this earthquake, funding was granted for new geologic studies in California, so this doesn't ever happen again. And from this point on, building codes in California are forever changed. I mean, geology really has shaped a lot of things in California, hasn't it? Because of this quake in 1913, San Francisco succeeds in establishing appropriative water rights to build a dam and pipe water from Yosemite's Hetch Hetchy Valley to secure a water source for its growing population and ensure that it never succumbs to fire again due to lack of water. John Muir dies a year later, probably from a broken heart, but not before establishing the framework for a National Park Service designed to curtail that sort of detrimental use. A year later, Lassen volcano erupts to let people know that subduction still goes on along the Northern California coast. And here we can add a splash of pink to our geologic map. So when we look at those extrusive rocks in pink there, we see Lassen and Shasta. This is the Cascade Range. These are all of our extrusively erupted volcanoes, or all volcanic material, all ash and a variety of extrusive deposits. To move back down south, let's talk again about some of those marine sediments that were crushed under the landscape during accretion. They're now becoming way more important as we figure out what to do with all of those petroleum products. Oil and natural gas are concentrated and they seep into the surface along California's many faults. Even today, if you walk the beaches of Southern California, or if you walk through downtown Los Angeles on a hot summer day, you can see tar seeping up from the cracks in the sidewalk. Millions of fossilized organisms are excavated from the tar pits. This is a tar pits, the La Brea tar pits down in Los Angeles. Ice Age wolves, sloths, camels, bears, mammoths, and over 2,000 fully intact saber-toothed cats, making it our state fossil. You could sort of say that what happens in La Brea tar pits stays in La Brea tar pits. Some bad geology jokes, right? So just as a side note, when you say La Brea tar pits, it's really a tautological phrase. La Brea means the tar in Spanish. So when you say the La Brea tar pits, you're really saying the tar pits. Oh, some fun trivia for you, right? The oil fields in Southern California are developed and in full swing by 1920. Here's a great shot of Huntington Beach, and a lot of Southern California ranchers and farmers become rich as they convert their lands into oil fields. As a result, a special industry is needed to entertain the newly rich, and Hollywood is born. And Hollywood has been making bad movies about geology ever since. Okay, so let's move up from Southern California and into the center of California. Looking at our geologic map here, we see this flat landscape, the breadbasket of California. This is the Central Valley. What makes it possible is really the sediment that was laid down or washed off of the Sierra during uplift. Remember, those plutons, the Sierra granite, was formed underground, approximately 5 miles underground, and 5 miles of dirt needed to be eroded in order for John Muir to be able to see Yosemite. So we can test the depth of the valley with seismic waves. The Central Valley, we find out, is filled with 27,000 feet of unconsolidated sediment. Do some math. That's a lot of dirt. So a mile, 5,280 feet times 5 miles of material that was sitting on top of our Sierra batholith, eroded off and filling into the Central Valley. Wow, we can grow a lot of food there, and we could store a lot of water in that unconsolidated dirt. The water is the new gold, and the groundwater stored in the sediments of the Central Valley is now being pumped to grow food for an ever-growing California and population, and for the nation, and for people around the world. Advances in refrigeration bring increasing attention to the ability to export food grown in the Central Valley. In the 1930s, the Central Valley Project uses rights of prior appropriation to divert water from the Cascade Range. You can kind of see Shasta in the background there, into the fields of the Central Valley. In 1940, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power sneakily uses rights of prior appropriation to divert waters leading into Mono Lake in the Eastern Sierra for use in Los Angeles. Lake levels in Mono Lake are lowered, and the tufa towers that we see here, which only form underwater, are exposed for the first time. Remember, it's an old mining law that enables this diversion of water. It enables this activity. In the 1950s, Stanford's Research and Technology Park is formed to train and house some really nerdy individuals. This helps to jumpstart the growing semiconductor industry, and it becomes the home for Hewlett-Packard. And this is where our 1872 mining law comes into play. It essentially allows this little agricultural valley to grow into one of the world's leading technological centers. Okay, so if you remember, the law allows workers to leave their place of employment to work for a competitor or to start their own company without any repercussion. This is the first and still one of the few states where a non-disclosure contract is void. For example, recently the CEO in 2010 of Hewlett-Packard decided to leave and go to work for Oracle, one of their direct competitors. Hewlett-Packard filed a lawsuit because they feared secrets would be shared. You know, at this point, a miner might get a little angry and reach for his Colt 45. But thank goodness there's an 1872 mining law that says no one can prevent you from lawful employment and you can walk away, avoiding a bloody shootout. Interpretation of this law, maybe extrapolating a little bit further, it's no wonder that there are more startups in California than in any other state. It's all due to an archaic mining law that was established to keep people civilized. Moving into the 1960s, the Santa Barbara ranchers that got rich by getting into the oil business, get a little bit of a wake-up call. The 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill is a pivotal moment as it really sort of helps to jumpstart the nation's environmental movement. In the 1970s, California's hippies demanded clean air, and they got the Clean Air Act. They demanded Clean Water Act. And while you're at it, let's create an agency to oversee the environment, and the EPA was formed. Wow. Geology did all that. The environmental movement gains traction, and we decide that there are more than just rocks and trees in Yosemite that need protection. So a lot of like-minded people take up the cause. I had to get my plug in for the Sierra Nevada Alliance somehow, right? It was probably the same San Francisco hippies that got us the Clean Air and Clean Water Act who turned some of their recreational hobbies into business opportunities, and they took to the hills. Where can those hippies go to find cheap land close to their other hippie friends in San Francisco, where there's ample privacy and access to water to grow the real yerba buena for their friends in the old yerba buena? The super hilly and isolated accreted terrains of the Northern California coast, the Emerald Triangle. Basically the trifecta of weed, Trinity, Humboldt, and Mendocino County, of course. The unique geology and geography of the accreted terrains in the North Coast helped to create another major socioeconomic shift here in California, and Hollywood has some new material to make movies out of. Gotta make it funny, right? So let's do a quick recap of some of the economies here in California. Let's do some quick math and put all of our pieces together. An estimated $2 billion a year, converted into today's money, of course, was extracted from the hills of California during the gold rush. Okay. How about California's green gold? The Emerald Triangle's monocrop is estimated at approximately $30 billion a year. And of course, California, the richest agricultural region of the world, the Central Valley, produces an estimated $50 billion a year. The oil and gas industry in California, which happens to be the third largest in the US behind Texas and North Dakota, pumps approximately $150 billion a year. Hollywood grosses about $300 billion a year. And if marijuana can't handle Hollywood's net pieces, California's pharmaceutical industry fills in at $200 billion a year. But all of that pales in comparison to the wealth of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is home to almost 100 companies now worth over $2 trillion. That's the equivalent of the GDP of Canada and Mexico combined, making California among the 5th largest economies in the world. That is, of course, until the San Andreas destroys everything we've created. But don't worry, Hollywood already made a movie about it, starring Dwayne Johnson as The Rock. I mean, seriously, folks, how geologic do you want this presentation? Okay, I get it. It was a lot to take in. But I'm hoping that you learned a little bit about how geology has made the state what it is today. We went through a lot: igneous rocks, extrusive rocks, metamorphic rocks, sedimentary rocks, faults, uplift, erosion, mineral riches. But remember, I had 2 goals here today. I had a goal to teach you some things that couldn't be Googled, and I had a goal to do it in the style of one of my favorite movie quotes, where we make some really sort of ridiculous connections. So are you ready? It's going to happen fast. Are your brains ready to make those connections? Here it goes. From the beginning. First, there was a big bang, and the earth cooled, and microorganisms ruled the seas. Faulting brings oil and minerals to the surface so that ranchers can get rich and miners can lay down the law. This allows us to irrigate the desert, grow food for the nation. Lake Tahoe is forever divided by the state line, and the TRPA is formed to manage both sides. A growing population places stress on our natural resources, and a collective environmental voice is needed. Then Hollywood gets high and invades politics. And Stanford grads help to develop Google, thereby making a search engine so I don't ever have to answer any more student questions. There you have it, folks. In reality, I hope you learned a little bit about your Golden State, and hopefully it was semi-entertaining along the way. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Valentine, for sharing with us today. So if everyone who has questions could please just add your questions to the meeting chat. We'll get to them in just a moment. We've got a ton of thank you. Wow, awesome, great presentation. So I'm so happy that everyone was pleased. I would like to invite all of our guests of this webinar to contribute to Sierra Nevada Alliance to help keep these monthly webinars free and accessible to all, and also to support our efforts to protect the Sierra Nevada in general. So you can visit sierranevadaalliance.org/donate or text WILD SNA to 530-456-4967 and join us in our efforts to protect the Sierra now and for the future. So again, please add any questions that you have into the meeting chat. We've got a few more minutes here, and so we can open it up for a Q&A. I did have one question that popped up about the formation of the Salton Sea. Someone had posted an article, I'm not sure if you have seen it, Scott, from ResearchGate, that says Salton Sea 1905 through 07 was not accidental. Do you have any comments on that, or have you seen the article?
I haven't seen the article, but I know that that area was sort of geologically way before humans sort of inundated by Colorado River water over time. But as we started irrigating that area, I know that we did sort of jump the river, sort of diverted into an irrigation canal. Whether that was accidental or not, it did happen during a very high flood event during a couple of years, starting around 1905.
Okay, great. I can also send you the link to that if you'd like to see it. That someone put it way up in the chat here, so I can send you that later if you want to take a look at the article too.
Cool.
So the next question we have is, what is the geology basis behind the quality of water in California? For example, heavy metals in Central Valley versus Hetch Hetchy seems to be better quality.
If you think about granite in general, it's relatively inert. It doesn't erode that easily. There's a lot of silica in it, and it's, what you could argue that one of the reasons why Lake Tahoe is so clear is because we don't have a whole lot of runoff or sedimentation from our local rocks. So the water around here and coming right off the Sierra is rather clean. But as we start moving through from Tahoe granite or Sierra granite down into the foothills and moving through some of those accreted terrain materials or old seafloor materials, and into the Central Valley, we're picking up a lot of different rock types, but we're also picking up a lot more pollutants from just people in general. There's not a lot of people living in the Sierra. South Lake Tahoe is the largest city in the Sierra. And anytime you're adding more and more people and use of our waterways and development is really going to we're going to see some issues along with water quality. So we start with relatively clean water, but as it passes through different rock types and it passes through people and industry, we pick up pollutants along the way.
Okay, the next question is, can you give more information on cinnabar and how is it formed?
Cinnabar is the ore. It's a solid rock ore. Ore is like just a body of rock that we find minerals in, minerals valuable enough to mine. We call it an ore. So it's host rock. We can see a lot of that cinnabar injected into our accreted materials, similar to that of gold. We see a lot of, lead and copper and mercury and gold and silver and all those things, all injected into hydrothermal veins or faulted weak zones within the rock material. And a lot of it's coming from our ocean crust material. It's heavy in metals, ocean crust, and a lot of those minerals get hyper injected into those weakened zones within the rock. Cinnabar, mercury ore. Because mercury would be a fluid at room temperature. So it bonds with, I can't remember the chemistry. I think there's maybe some sulfur involved. I have to look it up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I believe that may be the last question. Oh, here comes another one. Why are minerals concentrated on the ocean floor?
If we're just dealing with density, we get some natural separation in our rock materials based upon, lighter materials will rise towards the surface, heavy materials will sink down. We have more dense materials on our ocean floor. A good majority of the earth was made out of basaltic materials at one point, and then as we sort of push new materials through those basalts, we start to remelt or reassimilate more silica-based materials, and we get more lighter rock things, lighter rock materials to float. I don't want to say float, it's not really float, but to rise towards the surface, and heavier rock materials to stay concentrated down below. And so we do have a lot of those heavier metals still in our ocean floor. But as that ocean floor is subducted, we can remobilize a lot of those minerals with hot water and push them towards the surface and into the crust. So we're sort of seeing this natural separation. Lighter materials like granite or silica, rich minerals like quartz on the surface. And then as we get deeper into layers of the earth, we get to the core, which is of course primarily made up of iron and maybe a little nickel.
Next question, are there any geological implications from the increasing loss of the Colorado River water?
Loss of water are geologic implications from the loss of water for humans. There's a lot of implications for diminishing water supply, but geologically speaking, I don't really know if there's many implications for that. There's definitely sort of a water balance issue, but that water just goes somewhere else. It's moving around the planet. I don't know. I don't know really how to answer that question.
And next up, our continent has other high mountain ranges such as the Rockies. Are they also high heavy metals pushed up with this range?
I would say that most of the heavy metals, again, like we see this density separation between ocean materials versus continental materials, but through tectonic uplift, we can stir the pot a little bit and we can push a lot of deeper materials towards the surface. And then we really benefit from hydrothermal or hot water coursing through those rocks to concentrate the heavy metals. Otherwise, it would be unprofitable to mine. I mean, we do get a lot of mining in the Rockies, you know, lots of silver and gold and a variety of heavy metals. But all as a result of like hot water coursing through those ancient materials and concentrating them into certain spots so that it becomes profitable to mine.
Can you discuss the presence of naturally occurring arsenic found in the Sierra Nevada? And
we're all over the place.
Yeah, one more question that follows up with that. And is this natural form dangerous to the environment, or is it neutralized in some geological process?
Good question. There are small trace amounts of arsenic in a variety of rock materials, from granite through, you know, serpentine, our California state rock, but it is, I don't want to say relatively inert, but it is really sort of mobilized into waterways where it gets like public attention as we start applying maybe a little acid rain or a little bit of acidic groundwater or something like that. You know, these open pit mines, like Leviathan mine is a really sort of high profile mine kind of close to us here in Tahoe, where they were mining for sulfur. But once we expose the sulfur gets transformed into sulfuric acid when it comes into contact with the atmosphere, groundwater, and river water and stuff like that. And that sulfuric acid is really what breaks down the rocks even further. We get that dissolution of a lot of minerals through acid breakdown, and that's where the arsenic kind of gets like released or mobilized into people's water supplies, and it becomes like a little bit more worrisome. Is there another process that helps to neutralize it? I don't know. That gets into a little bit of chemistry that I might not fully understand.
Can you share insight into the occurrence of lithium in Imperial/Salton Sea area?
The Salton Sea is plagued by a lot of minerals being deposited sort of naturally via just the evaporation of that water body, but also through the urban and sort of agricultural runoff in the agricultural communities nearby, and it's quite possible that we get a lot of that happening as a result of humans and less as a result of just the sea being there. I don't know that much about lithium, but it's possible that there are some naturally occurring areas where we would be mining for lithium, but also it kind of comes as a byproduct of some of our human management of the area.
Do you think that California will need to change its water and contract laws to adapt to modern needs?
But probably it'd be really smart if we did. That's a really tough one. Whether we can pull that off, a lot of people are clearly reliant upon that water. We've established like a whole state around that sort of water supply, and can we just turn off the tap on the Colorado? The answer is probably no. But we've been in discussions for, I think there's been water talks around the usage of the around the Colorado River for decades now. So here we are, maybe finally getting a lot more pressure to be able to pull that off. Who knows? Maybe we will.
Okay. Any last minute questions? That was a good lineup of Q&A there. Oh, I got one last before we end for the hour. So how does Lake Tahoe manage to stay full in the midst of extreme drought and high water usage in the area?
Oh, good. Probably something I know more than I don't have very much knowledge about lithium, but I do know a lot about Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe 1 is incredibly deep. It's 1,600 some odd feet deep. So it's going to take a while for that to evaporate away in a really wet climate where we get a lot of snowfall. We have a dam on Lake Tahoe that sort of regulates the top 6 or so feet. And when we are in drought like we are now, the lake will drop below the natural rim, and there's not much management you can do. It just sort of sits there. I don't know what else we would be able to do under the extreme drought conditions, but just sort of pray for more water. So it's always going to sort of remain high because our evaporation rates versus the amount of water that's coming in are sort of more or less in balance. And
one final question, and then if you're okay with it, Scott, I can share your email address and can
sure.
ask you any follow-ups. But here, one last question is, how did Lake Tahoe form?
So when we talked about compression as a result of subduction, followed up with extension as a result of movement along the San Andreas, we form more or less the basin and range topography. So that mountain valley topography. Lake Tahoe is smack dab in the first basin. So we have the Sierra Nevada on the western side, drops down due to faulting Lake Tahoe Basin, and then the Carson Range on the eastern side of Lake Tahoe, and then it drops down into the Carson Valley, and then we have the Pine Nut Mountain Range, and it goes on and on and on all the way across into Nevada. So Mountain Valley. This is just the first system, or first part of the system right here in Lake Tahoe. So it's all a result of faulting. So you could argue that we had the Tahoe granites that we see here in the West Shore and South Shore formed as a result of subduction and the formation of plutons, the uplift and erosion and faulting that ensued, the dropping down or the normal faulting to create the basin of Lake Tahoe, then the plugging of the lake via new volcanism on the far end or the north shore of the lake to help the water to rise even further. And then of course we can throw in some glaciation and some modern erosion and things of that sort, and we can really sculpt and shape the Lake Tahoe Basin. The short answer would be normal faulting, but we can kind of elaborate beyond that. There's a lot of little pieces.
Excellent.
Hopefully that at least got you started.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Valentine, thank you so much for this excellent presentation, and to everyone for joining us today. I will be sharing the recording of this webinar along with a link to fill out an evaluation form that helps just improve our programs and webinars. And so if you have any follow-up questions, I can also include the contact information. And to get involved with what's happening around the Sierra and at the Alliance, please sign up for our email alerts at sierranevadaalliance.org and follow us on social media. And this is our last event for 2022. So be on the lookout for our event schedule for next year. And thank you once again. Have a great day.
Thank you.